Welcome, everybody. My name is Dr. Jackie Jacob. I am the Poultry Extension Specialist at the University of Kentucky. And as part of my duties, I am also the coordinator for the Small and Backyard Flocks Community of Practice on e-extension, which is the electronic version of the Cooperative Extension Service. As coordinator, I manage the website, which I will put in the chat box shortly, and the Facebook page, and I organize the monthly webinars for which you are joining us today. So during the webinar, I will be on mute while the speaker is talking, and if you have a question at any time, you can either put it in the Q&A box, or you can type it in the chat. I will be monitoring both sites while the presentation is going on. And if your question is pertinent to what is being discussed at that moment, I may pop up. And so if you see me again show up, then I have a question, a clarification on something being said. Otherwise, I will hold the questions to the end for a Q&A at the end. So if you would like, please put in the chat box where you're located. That is helpful. So far, we have Kentucky, Ohio, California, and Puerto Rico. Hopefully, he's getting nice weather there too. So today's, and North Carolina. And today's presentation is on raising Coturnix quail, also known as Japanese quail, for egg production. And Brett, how do you say it? Kreifels?
Kreifels.
Kreifels from Nebraska. We don't have anybody from Nebraska on. We do have somebody from Indiana. Is going to be discussing egg production. So it's all yours. If you have any problems, let me know. Otherwise, I'll be on mute and monitoring questions.
Thank you, Jackie. Well, welcome everyone. Glad to be here with you guys, talk about this topic. So this is a topic that I like to talk about because I used to raise quail. I don't anymore, but I loved to raise Coturnix quail when I had them. So great source of eggs, great source of meat. We won't be talking about the meat side today. It's a little bit different topic, but we're just going to talk about egg production today. So I'm Brett Kreifels. I'm with Nebraska Extension, and I am the head of the 4-H department here in Douglas and Sarpy County, which encompasses the Omaha metro area. So I don't actually live in Omaha. I live in one of the towns outside of Omaha, but Coturnix quail are a great quail to even raise in the city. Very small size, easy to take care of. So what we're going to do today is talk a little bit about how we raise Coturnix quail for egg production. We'll talk about egg production. We'll talk about feeding. We'll talk a little bit at the end about marketing of the eggs, because I'll tell you from personal experience, depending on how many quail you have, you're going to be inundated with lots and lots and lots of eggs, which is a good thing and a bad thing. Let's see if my computer works here. There we go. So first things first, where are we going to get our quail from? So back when I had quail, I started out getting them as hatching eggs. So there was a number of, I'll say kind of backyard flock companies that sell Coturnix quail eggs. There are a number of hatcheries that ship eggs as well, a number of hatcheries that ship chicks. Or the other option is adult stock. So that adult stock can come from breeders, they can come from auctions, and some hatcheries will also sell adult stock. I will just tell you from experience, and this is for quail eggs or chicken eggs or duck eggs, that getting hatching eggs through the mail can be kind of tricky. I just sent eggs out to California actually this last week, and post office was not the best at handling the box, and sometimes we get air cells that are a little displaced. We get yolks that have broken inside. So hatching eggs can be an issue. So I would, if you can, get shipped chicks or adult stock. In my mind, there are 3 commercial varieties that are readily available and ones that produce the most eggs and then turn around and produce the most meat as well. So these 3 varieties are the Texas A&M, which was developed at Texas A&M to produce a quail that had a really good feed to gain ratio, produced a lot of meat, did not eat a lot, and produced a lot of eggs. So you can see that in the top there with a little white bird with a dot on its head. That's a characteristic of all the Texas A&Ms. Also wanted a bird that didn't show any of the brown pin feathers when they were processed. So that's where these guys were developed. You got the jumbo browns, and you can obviously tell which one is the jumbo brown. And then you got the typical Pharaoh type or the wild type of Coturnix quail. I've had experience with all 3, but the one that I've dealt with a lot back in the day was the Texas A&Ms. Nice little birds, nice meaty birds. And I'll tell you a quick story. When I processed these guys for my own home human consumption, my wife wouldn't eat them because they look like baby birds. So, but man, they were delicious, and the eggs are just as delicious. So let's just talk about rearing these chicks, raising these baby quail here, because baby quail are extremely delicate. They're very small. They're very susceptible to even the slightest temperature changes. And I'm talking about the temperature changes on the lower end. Just like regular baby chicks, they do need a heat source. And we like to brood them about 95 degrees after they come out of the incubator. All right, so they come from a 100-degree environment down to about 95. And you can drop that about 5 degrees every week. And I'll tell you, these guys grow extremely fast. So dropping at 5 degrees, typically in a normal setting, is just fine. Now, if you live in the colder climates like I do in Nebraska, I know we have someone from Indiana. If you're raising them outside in a shed or even a garage, you might need to adjust that a little bit. But if they're inside in a basement that's away from all the elements, you can probably get away with dropping that to 5 degrees every week. Also depends on when you raise them too. From spring, early spring or summer, depends on how you'll monitor that temperature. Also, provide a shallow dish for water, and I would add marbles or even pea gravel to prevent drowning. So they do make quail waterers for baby quail. And if you can get a hold of those are great. They'll help prevent drowning. But if you don't, if you have a regular little chick water, you need to put marbles or rocks in it to prevent drowning. They're just very, very tiny little things, and they can drown very easily. Now, here's one thing that people don't quite understand when they're raising quail is they think they can go to their local feed store and grab a chick starter or some other thing for regular baby chicks or even baby ducks. But quail are game birds. They require a higher protein than a chicken does, or a duck does, or a goose does. So what I would recommend is when you go to your feed store, ask for a game bird starter feed. This is going to be roughly about a 28 to 30% protein feed. And this same feed is used to feed pheasants and quail, chuckers, and turkeys as well. And you want to feed this from hatch all the way up to 6 weeks of age. Don't put anything else in that feed. You want a complete feed, so just the chick starter. When you brood them, I would prefer or advise you to brood them in rings. Brooders without corners if possible. These guys are very excitable. And a lot of times what happens is when they get excited or scared, they will pile on each other into a corner. So then you have some suffocation going on and piling. We don't want that. So if at all possible, brood them in a ring. You can achieve this by, you can take a cardboard box and cut it in a way that makes a round ring, or you can actually buy corrugated rings for brooding purposes. So just kind of be mindful of that, just because these guys do like to pile up. Turkeys do this too, pheasants do it too, so just be mindful. And like I said, they do grow extremely fast. They're ready for the table in 6 weeks. They start laying eggs in about 6 weeks, right? So these guys are extremely fast growing. Now, we can't get eggs from males. We know that, right? So we need to sex the quail as they get a little older. So there's a couple ways to sex the quail. When they become an adult, you can sex them based on their color, on their sound, and then the presence or absence of a gland that secretes foam. And this foam is said to help with sperm motility during mating processes. So here's a picture here of a male and female quail, and you can see that the male on the left side has more of a, I'll say, chestnut colored breast, and the color on the face is darker. Okay? Whereas the female, like a lot of females in the bird world, are more drab colored. She's got more mottling or speckling over her breast, doesn't have that deep red color in her face. This is a reliable way to sex the male and females of the Faro color. So the typical Faro quail, or even the jumbo browns. It is not a good indication of sex in a Texas A&M because the males and females both are white. Okay. So we can use color, and we can sex them on sound if you can catch the males crowing. So Jackie, I'm going to see if this works, to play this video.
That face that is
let me know if
usually
you can
covered
hear
by
it or not.
has finally made an appearance.
You hear that crowing sound?
I hear it. Yeah.
Okay. You can see him crowing there. So this is a call of a male Coturnix quail, and this is for the A&Ms, the jumbos, and the typical Faros. So if you hear that, you know you've got a male. Okay.
Okay.
Now try to go back and see if this works. All right.
That worked.
Perfect. And then probably the most tried and true way, other than the crowing piece, is the foam gland. So if you lift up the back tail feathers of a Coturnix quail, what you're going to find is this little gland or bulbous spot right above the vent. And this is for the foam. So again, this helps with sperm motility. It helps protect the sperm as they are inseminated in the female. But this is an indication of a male. The females will not have this gland. So those are three tried and true ways to sex the quail. So obviously the males, if you're wanting baby quail later on, fertilized eggs, you'll keep the males with the females. If not, then the males can be harvested at around 6 weeks of age, and they can go in the freezer. Okay. Let's talk about housing a little bit. So what I have a picture of here is a breeder colony system, but you can keep some females on this type of system. This is a higher end, higher dollar breeding colony system. I'm here to tell you though that raising quail for egg production and the housing of these females does not have to be elaborate whatsoever, right? You can keep a number of females in a typical rabbit hutch type situation. One thing you need to make sure of though is you need to have them either on wire, or you can raise them on the floor with proper litter. When you have them on wire, you want at least probably no more than about a ½ inch, ¼ inch wire on the bottom, just to prevent the feet from going through, preventing the eggs from breaking. But you also want that manure to fall through into the collection trays below. You want to account for at least 1 square foot per bird. Okay, so keep that in mind when you have your rabbit hutch type system, you have a floor pan, or if you have a custom made quail cage, you want at least 1 square foot per bird. And along those lines, you also want at least 1/4 inch of feeder and water space per bird as well. Do not overcrowd these things. These guys do tend to have some cannibalism problems, and that can usually arise from a couple of different things. It usually arises from inadequate space or overcrowding. It can be caused by they're missing protein or nutritional aspects of their feed. A lot of times it's protein because feathers are full of protein, so they have to get it from somewhere. And then third, it could be caused by light, usually too high intensity of light. So those are 3 ways in which we can prevent cannibalism, is by watching your overcrowding, make sure their protein level is adequate, and watching the light intensity. If you do have feather pecking, just look at those 3 aspects, right? Pull the offenders out of there, okay? Put them in a separate pen. There are ways, usually when they're a little bit younger, to beak trim, which would be cutting off or cauterizing the front part of the beak to prevent that from happening. They do that in the commercial laying hens for the same reason, but just kind of monitor that. Usually it's not a problem when all three of those things are met. So let's talk about light requirements. So with birds, in order for them to lay eggs, they need to have light stimulation. So I always like to talk about it in terms of like when we have our songbirds in the springtime, right? They don't lay eggs in the wintertime, not necessarily because it's cold, but because there's not enough daylight. Everything is caused by the light intensity or amount of light from the sun. So we need to mimic that if we want to have eggs essentially all year round. And this is something that we do in the commercial laying hen industry as well. We simulate day length. So female quail require at least 14 to 16 hours of light to stimulate that maximum egg production. They'll usually start laying at about that 14 hours, but it's the 16 hours or the simulated of 16 hours light, 8 hours dark summertime to keep them laying at the maximum level. Okay. I'll tell you, the lighting is it does not have to be elaborate. It can be a very low wattage bulb, an incandescent lamp. It could be an LED light or a fluorescent light if you're in a larger barn type situation. It does not have to be elaborate. Again, just watch the intensity of light if you start to see some feather pecking. And one thing I always like to do too is put your lights on a timer. Just a simple light timer that you use on a regular light in your house. Set it for 16 hours of light, 8 hours of dark to simulate that summertime light. Okay. I don't know if there's any questions, Jackie, but watch that.
None so far.
Perfect, perfect. So we're going through these quite kind of quick. So if you do have any questions, feel free to interrupt me. Feeding the laying flock. This is very important because if we feed the hens a good quality, complete feed, then we're going to get good quality eggs. We're going to get good egg production as well. But there's a few things we need to keep in mind to make sure the eggs are strong enough. We don't have any brittle shells. The birds do not get osteoporosis from lack of calcium, and we get maximum egg production. So like I said a little bit earlier, we hatch these quail. We feed them a 28 to 30% protein game bird starter feed from hatch to 6 weeks of age. Okay. At that 6 weeks mark, then your birds are sexually mature. So they're going to start laying eggs. And they even might start laying eggs as early as 5 weeks. It just kind of depends. But when you start to see eggs, that's when we need to start switching to a layer diet. And the difference between the layer diet and the starter diet or the grower diet is not only is it the reduced amount of protein, but it's also the influx or increase of calcium. So these females are going to need about 2.5 to 3.5% calcium in their diet to not necessarily contribute to the overall thickness of the eggshell, but to replace the bone calcium they're losing by putting that bone calcium into the eggshell. So that's one thing that even with chicken eggs that people don't understand is the reason why we give calcium is not for the direct calcium on the eggshell, but it is to replace the calcium in the bone. That's when we start to get osteoporosis problems. So 2.5 to 3.5% of calcium in the diet, but you can knock that protein down to 18 to 20%. And I'd actually stick on the higher end of that. I'd stick to that 20% mark. Again, these are game birds. They need to have more protein than a typical chicken would. Okay. One thing you can do up to that 6 week mark, if you want to integrate some of that starter feed and that layer feed together before we start getting eggs, that's going to help with that transition a little bit as well. Okay. You normally can find the starter feeds and the layer feeds at a feed store, but if you cannot, especially with the starter feed, you can use regular chick starter, and it's going to be about 20 to 18%. Will be fine, but your maturing birds are going to be slower. So you may not get eggs until 7 weeks, 8 weeks, as opposed to the 5 or 6. Okay, so just be aware of that. Most feed stores either have game bird starter or they have the means of getting it for you. So just keep that in mind. Crumbled feeds are best, and this produces feed waste. So you can see down there at the bottom right-hand side, these birds are eating crumbled feed. To my knowledge, and Jackie, you might correct me, I don't believe there are any pellets small enough to satisfy Coturnix quail. I don't think they make a small enough die for the pellets, or a pellet that's going to stay together. That's going to be released.
I think they would just crumble any pellets they made.
Yeah. So this is the best way to do it. You can get custom mixed mash type feeds, but again, you're going to have some waste because the birds are going to pick and choose what they want to eat. So I would just go for a crumbled form. Your feed intake is going to be about 21 grams per bird per day. And that is an average. Now, things like the weather, if it's a little chillier out, may contribute to more feed consumption. If it's hotter out, it's going to contribute to less feed consumption. But on average, your bird's going to get eat about 21 grams per day of feed. So it takes roughly about 420 grams to produce a dozen eggs. So that is less than a pound of feed per dozen. Okay. Very efficient birds, even more efficient than the chicken is at converting food into eggs. And like I said earlier, they produce a lot of eggs. So they really like their feed, and they can convert that feed very easily. So let's talk about egg production. So I mentioned a little bit ago, they start at about 6 weeks of age. Keep them on that 20% layer feed with that calcium. You will get thin-shelled eggs when there's inadequate calcium in the diet. So just kind of monitor that. Now, quail eggs are naturally thinner shelled. I mean, they're a small egg, okay? So, but you'll really tell if they're really thin-shelled and they break incredibly easy, okay? They'll lay every 24 to 26 hours, so there will be a time where the bird does not lay an egg, one time a week normally. That's very similar to a chicken. If they live on a floor system, you want to prevent the eggs from being soiled. So make sure your litter is clean. Pick them up frequently. These guys don't use nest boxes like normal chickens will. So you'll find eggs, if they're on a floor system, scattered all over the place. So you have to go on your own little Easter egg hunt. But if they're housed in caged systems, like you can see the one there, normally the cage systems the commercial ones will have the eggs, the floor slanted or sloped. So the eggs come away from the birds and they're easier to pick up. This is probably the best way. It reduces breakage, easy to pick up, gets away from the birds, and they don't get soiled and they get manure on them or dirt. So I would always advocate for this, but even if you have wired floored without a slope, still better than nothing. Now, one thing, I don't think I mentioned it here. Oops. So if you do get soiled eggs, best thing to do is just wash them off with some warm water. Just like you would a regular egg, just be very careful. Again, they're a little more fragile than a regular chicken egg. So just a little bit of warm water. You can use a mild soap if you want. A washcloth or a paper towel, try to get some of that manure or soil or dirt off. It's all you really need. But heck, with those colored eggs, you probably don't see it the manure very well. It kind of looks like those blotches there. So I told you they lay a lot. So expect a typical hen to produce about 200 to 250 eggs per year, just like a normal chicken. They produce a lot of eggs. There will be a time, and this goes for all birds, that there will be a time where they rest. They have a resting period. That's their molting period. So that's when their feathers will drop. They will not lay eggs for about 6 weeks or so, 8 weeks, give or take. And then it'll start back up again. Their productive life is around 2 years. At that point in time, then you start to see eggs start to drop off a little bit. Then you might want to think about getting some newer female quail in there to kind of replace the older ones. And just for reference, about 5 quail eggs is equivalent to 1 large chicken egg. So that just gives you an idea of how many quail eggs are equal to 1 chicken egg. So when you have a recipe that requires 1 large egg, 2 large eggs, you can kind of just guesstimate that you're going to need 5 or 10 quail eggs to make up for that. And I would highly recommend, if you raise quail, swap out those for those recipes. I can tell you, I thought there's a difference in taste with the quail eggs as opposed to chicken eggs, but I don't know, some may be able to tell, some won't.
Somebody asked, is molting annual like chickens?
It is annual, yes. Unless you keep them in a, I'll say modified environment or controlled environment. That's the word I'm looking for, controlled environment. A lot like these commercial hen operations where they typically molt maybe once a year, maybe once every 2 years, something like that. But typically, molting is once a year, sometimes 2 times a year. It just kind of depends. Good question.
Does it occur in a particular season or at a particular age?
Yep. So typically, if you're on an outside system, your molting is probably going to happen, probably in the early summer. Sometimes in the early fall, you start to get a molt. Usually it's a stressor caused by, difference in light. Sometimes the temperature will cause it, but typically it's in summer, early fall. When you get them into the wintertime, then we get some problems. And unlike chickens, quail usually don't do a winter time molt, but it's never out of the question. Good question. All right. Marketing eggs. So you're going to get a lot. And good thing is there are places to go with these eggs. Now, I will tell you, though, you need to do your research on this. Okay. You can't just go to a store and say, hey, I've got a carton of quail eggs, or I've got 10 dozen cartons of quail eggs, whatever. Would you like to buy them? Because most stores, like the box stores, like Walmart, well, I think a lot of you guys have Kroger. We call them bakers here in Nebraska. Hy-Vee, which is a regional store. You can't go to those big grocery stores and sell these eggs. There are rules and regulations behind that. Plus, the general public probably is not going to buy little tiny quail eggs. Okay. However, there are ways to sell eggs to your target markets. And here's what I identified as target markets: your health food stores, your smaller stores. I know Whole Foods is kind of a bigger chain, but they may be more open to these type of eggs because they are, quote, healthy.
I was at Whole Foods yesterday and picked up quail eggs.
There you go. See? Yep. Ethnic food stores and restaurants. This is probably the easiest way to market your eggs. Right before we got on today, I was trying to do a search with some of the ethnic grocery stores and restaurants around here in Omaha, and I couldn't find anyone that actually sells quail eggs. I bet they do. I just don't go into those stores. But I do know a gal down in southeast Nebraska, and she does raise quail eggs, and she does ship eggs up here to Omaha to some of the stores and to Lincoln, and sells her quail eggs there. So check with your those ethnic grocery stores and restaurants. Higher end restaurants will also purchase quail eggs for some of the recipes, or just direct sale to consumers. When I had quail eggs, this is exactly what I would do. I would just post on Facebook, I think I did, or some other means, and I would get people who would buy quail eggs just for eating. I had males of mine, so some would hatch them, but more often than not, it's for eating. But before you look at any of this stuff, please check with your state and local requirements for selling eggs. There are requirements for cartoning and labeling. There are requirements, at least in the state of Nebraska, for an egg number. I can tell you a personal story. When I was first starting out and I called our Department of Ag and said, hey, I need an egg number. Excuse me. And I said, it's for quail eggs. And they were like, okay. We've never had this question before. You want to sell quail eggs and you need an egg number. So they gave me an egg number, and basically all that does is connect that number to you as the supplier of the egg. So if something should happen, if you have a disease outbreak, if you have a salmonella outbreak, they can trace it back to you. That's essentially what it is. So please check with your local and state governments first before you look into selling quail eggs. Oops. So here's just some items that you probably need on that labeling. I guess, again, it may be different for other states, but you need the name of the farm or the name of the company. You need your contact information, your farm name, your address, phone number, email, right? A safe handling statement. So if you ever look at a carton of eggs, regular chicken eggs, you're going to see that safe handling statement. Essentially, that says that the eggs need to be refrigerated, handle them with care, stuff like that. Keep them at 40 degrees, regular refrigerator temperature or below. You need the package dates, the date they were put into their packages. You'll see this on egg cartons as well. State issued egg number, that will need to be on your label. And nutrition labeling. So if you are selling these at the store, this is one thing you will probably need to have on your labels, nutrition labeling. You're going to see in the next slide is a generic label, and it can be used for pretty much all the quail eggs. It does cost quite a bit of money, at least it does in one lab we have here in Omaha, to do nutrition labeling on these things. And you do a whole nutrition lineup, proteins, fats, vitamin, minerals, everything you see on a normal nutrition label, you'll have to do on these guys. So I would recommend just using a generic label, but make sure those are all on there. So cartoning can be done with this, I'll say maybe more expensive plastic label, not label, carton. And you can get those from anywhere, or they do make some pulp style cartons that you can also buy and put your label on. I know a couple people that use both, and they use them very well. Most often than not, I see the clear plastic ones. And I will say, I did look up my friend down in Southeast Nebraska, and she was selling her dozen quail eggs for $6.18. So that's a lot for a dozen quail eggs, and she gets that. She gets that amount. You think about chicken eggs at the store, sometimes they have them on sale for 99 cents or $1.80 or something like that. So there's money to be made in quail eggs. And this is just an example of the nutrition label that can be on your label. It has the calories per serving, and in this case, one serving is 1 quail egg, total fat, cholesterol, sugars, proteins. One thing I will point your attention to is that cholesterol amount. This is why quail eggs are considered more healthy than regular chicken eggs, because of their total cholesterol amount. So one chicken egg, has more cholesterol than a quail egg. So if you use a couple quail eggs or 5 quail eggs for 1 chicken egg, right, you're still getting less cholesterol. And there's always all these stigmas about, are eggs bad for you? Are they good for you? But this is why you can market these guys to a health food store, and they may be more apt to buy your product, right? Because they are considered more healthy. Okay. And that's all I really got. The good thing about raising quail for egg production is it's extremely easy. I would almost say, I'm gonna stop sharing this. I'd probably say it's even more easy than raising chickens for eggs. I mean, you got to wait 5.5, 6 months for chicken eggs. You have to wait 6 weeks for quail eggs, right?
That's a big difference.
A huge difference. And the amount of feed they go through is so much less in quail than chickens.
Don't need as much room either.
They don't need, nope. So you can, I mean, for those of you that live in an urban type setting, they don't make a lot of noise. Keep them in your backyard. You can keep a lot of them in your backyard. One thing I didn't touch on either was the government regulations on these things. They are not considered a game bird like the bobwhite quail or some of the other types of quail. So double check, but I'm pretty sure you do not need a permit from your local, we call them game and parks here in Nebraska, but your local wildlife authority, state government. So it makes them really easy to raise. Don't have to worry about that red tape. Do check though your municipality rules and regulations, your ordinances, just in case there are issues with raising poultry in your backyard. I know here in the Omaha area, we do have people that raise chickens, ducks, hopefully not geese, but you never know. I know some raise a few turkeys. Don't know how they get away with that, but just double check.
There was a question, I answered it for you, but did I miss the maximum productive age, which you said was 2?
About 2 years.
It did ask for the lifespan too. I assume that, it would last longer if you didn't, they wouldn't necessarily be as productive, but they can live longer, just
They
like
can live longer. Yep. Oh yeah. So they can probably live about what, 5 or 6 years, maybe. I mean, they're not a long-lived bird.
No.
But
I used to work in the quail unit for genetics, and yeah, 5 years was probably
it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you want to know if the recording is? Yes, we are recording it. It'll be up on our YouTube page shortly.
After doing this presentation, now I'm kind of thinking about getting back into quail. They were so easy and fun, and I've got more room now that we've moved to an acreage. I kind of want to get back into them. So, and they're really tasty too.
You have to have a market.
You do. You have to find the market first. And that was maybe the mistake that I made years ago. Is I had all these quail but didn't have the market for them. So I'd have all these eggs, and I ate a lot of quail eggs, and it also threw away a lot of quail eggs. So
the other thing is that after they finish their 2 years of laying,
yep,
are they still good for eating, or are they old and tough?
I would say they're probably a little old and tough, kind of like an old hen.
Yeah, so I figured with spin hens, but trying to get them processed,
yep,
could be extremely difficult.
Yes.
Depending on the thing. How do you market and determine the demand for quail eggs?
Well, I think it all has to do with just making cold calls or stopping by those restaurants or those health food stores or grocery stores and just show them, take them in your product with the label on it. Just say, hey, would you guys be interested in this? And then always think about this, that you need to market your eggs so it's appealing to the grocery store. So don't charge too much, because remember, they got to turn around and resell it. So if you charge, again, I don't know how my friend down in Southeast Nebraska does this at $6.18 a dozen, but she does.
I paid that at least for
Did you?
the quail eggs, but I was just so shocked to see quail eggs. I bought them for the packaging more than anything else, because I have to give a talk on it. So someone want to know about the demand for meat. Next month's webinar is on raising quail, both Japanese and both the Coturnix and the bobwhite for meat. So that might be a better thing for it. But trying to get it processed is going to be your problem. What are the market differentiators for quail eggs versus chicken eggs?
I think it all really has to do with the health benefits. I shouldn't even call them health benefits, but the differences in the cholesterol levels and the perceived health benefits. Maybe that's it. Because they're a smaller egg, because they are lower in cholesterol, I think they're more appealing to certain people than some of the chicken eggs. And plus, they just look cool. I mean, I saw just this last week, people were posting, they dyed their quail eggs for Easter. So look a little different, but I think it's just something different.
One of the unique things, because I worked in the genetics area, is that each quail female has a fingerprint that her egg always has the exact same pattern. That allows you to house many females with a single male and still know which egg came from which female for genetics, which is interesting. I didn't realize that. Somebody wanted to know about processing, but I think that's more suited for next month's webinar when we're talking about meat production and we're talking about eggs. Although if you did mention killing the males and eating those, but yeah, it's basically the same process as with chickens, but it's a much smaller hole.
Much, yes. And like I said earlier, I processed my males, and my wife would not eat them. She was like, these are just like little baby birds, but they tasted good. I'll tell you that. They tasted really good.
Yeah, they have that. They have a more gamey flavor.
They do.
Do you know where we find special containers, perhaps even clear for packaging? You can Google that
Anywhere.
on the internet. They'll be selling them just like they sell regular cartons for quail eggs. The ones I bought were in clear packages as well. So, are there any more questions? I'm not seeing any. I hope you will join us next month when we are again talking about quail, and it will be for meat and for release into hunting preserves, because a lot of bobwhite quail are raised in the southeast for hunting preserves, although some are raised just like broilers for meat production as well. So hopefully you'll join us in a month from now, May 6th, I think it is at 3 o'clock. Oh, I got a Q&A. Oh, okay, so yeah, thank you, very informative. Good. I learned a lot. I thought it was interesting. So thank you very much for volunteering to talk today, Brett. I really appreciate it. Thank you guys for attending, and hopefully I'll see you next week. And I'm going to shut the recording, and then I want to talk to you.